trips up north.
Yeah, I mean that was the goldest gold of camp to me were truck trips, because because remember, I had my parents living at camp. My parents were helping to run the camp, and although I felt a lot of freedom and autonomy at camp, it wasn't like they were looking over my shoulder. They were dealing with all the kids. But a truck trip, boy, you had whoever was driving, who was maybe in their 20s, and then a counselor or two who was in their maybe 19, and then us kids who were, what would we have been, 13, 14, 15, yeah. Something like that. Talking about freedom, man, just taking off and heading north to the Upper Peninsula, for God's sakes, in this great big old truck. Originally there was this big old black GM or Chevy thing that sounded like a bus that had the weird gear shift sounds, and a big old plywood box, no safety, no seat belts, just benches and piles of sleeping bags, and just hanging out and waving at people out the windows, and then going up across the bridge, the Mackinac Bridge, and especially going to these wilderness places like Vermilion, which was the old Coast Guard station, which had been abandoned, I guess, in the 1930s or 40s, whenever it was abandoned in, 50s perhaps. And getting to stay wherever we wanted to stay, and some of us would stay in little groups in one of the buildings, up in the lighthouse tower, or someplace, or on the beach, and that was about as free as you could get. I remember one time though, I don't know what town we were in, somewhere in the Upper Peninsula. It was Dale Randall. And again, he was really trying to bond with us kids as young adults. And we were in some town, and at the movie theater, the movie, The Boston Strangler was playing. And somehow that seemed like a really risque and adult kind of movie. And he got it into his head that wouldn't it be cool that we would go see that. But then he figured he'd call Gus, call back to Gus. And of course we knew he'd called back to Gus, and the answer was no. And we didn't go to the movie.
What a shock!
Yeah, I know. But yeah, truck trips were the best.
Well, no, we had a Land Cruiser, and the outpost boys would go to Whitefish Point in the Upper Peninsula. Now they had decided that they were going to have a Thanksgiving dinner up there. And a Thanksgiving dinner isn't much without having turkey. So they went and bought a turkey, kept it around the camp until they were ready to go, loaded the turkey with the boys in the back of the Land Cruiser, and headed north. The turkey was very happy to go along. He didn't really have much to do about his fate, but the boys fed him on the way up. He rode sometimes in the back with them, sometimes the front seat with the driver, but he didn't do any driving. They eventually went up over the bridge and got to Whitefish Point, and it's time to kill the turkey and roast him. But a vote was taken, and the vote was unanimous that we didn't want to roast that turkey. So they had spaghetti. And the turkey rode back with them and stayed around camp for the rest of the summer. Happily, well, when they came to flag raising, that turkey would come out to flag raising and pick at the bright buttons on the boys' overalls. And they had difficulty shooing him away because he wasn't particularly where he pecked.
Great.
We were up in the UP and had a little downtime. We didn't have anything scheduled immediately, so I thought we'd take a shortcut. And we were going originally down a 2-track, and I took off down a less traveled 2-track. And pretty soon branches were just breaking against the front of the vehicle, and they're coming in the windows, and the thing's rocking from side to side. And I finally decided I probably ought to slow this down just for safety's sake. And I come to a stop, and the kids are going, "More! More!" All but one kid.
You remember what was his name?
I don't know if it was Tim Rogers. Tim Rogers is back there, and he's already got a lawsuit brewing. This is insane.
Oh, just what I remember is going up to the Upper Peninsula, up to Vermilion, and going to that lighthouse station, the Coast Guard station, and we had a great time, but the food that we packed in was 2 bologna sandwiches. That's what you had for the hike out 10 miles and the hike back. So you could eat it.
Drive back there?
No, we hiked all the way out, which is a long ways for little kids. And so, of course, everybody ate their sandwiches immediately at lunchtime, and then we had no dinner, and woke up in the morning, had no breakfast, and had a 10-mile hike. But we picked raspberries, which were everywhere. We picked buckets and buckets of raspberries walking back. And when we got back, we had a 3-hour dinner of raspberry pancakes.
But the favorite, well, the truck trips were the highlight. The canoe trips and the truck trips were both unique in their own way, but it seemed like the truck trip really appealed to the kids. And one time we went on a map and traced all the different routes and all the different things we had seen, from Hartwick Pines to Sleeping Bear Sand Dunes to Aqueoc Falls. There's a whole lower Michigan agenda. But the real appeal was the Upper Peninsula and Mackinac Island, which was the climax for it on the way back. But we found that we liked the Devil's Slide, which are sand dunes very similar in height to Sleeping Bear, because we would drive to the top. And then the kids would all run down, no matter what their level of ambition was. And then they had to come back up. So at Sleeping Bear, sometimes the kids would climb halfway up and go, oh, I'm tired, and they'd just run down from there. And Larry Roberts, to this day, has the record for how many times he went up and down. They'd run down to the bottom to Lake Superior, climb back up, and down and up and down and up. I think Larry did it 7 or 8 times.
Ottawa, there were so many trips. Going to on the truck trip up to Saney and up to Whitefish Point, swimming in Lake Superior, which lasted seconds for most people.
Yep.
Whew. Well, Bob was a CIT in the out camp, and well, probably the best Bob Russell story was when he, got me to the hospital. I think he's told that story when I got stung. We were leading a canoe trip on the Rifle River. Bob led. He was an experienced canoeist and one of the leaders. I trailed, and we always kept the kids in between us. And the kids all went under this low overhang, which I followed, but along the line there's a hornet's nest and there's actually a paper wasp. I found out exactly what I was allergic to. Well, by the time I went under, they were sufficiently antagonized, so they nailed me, and I had an allergic reaction to it. And Bob has told the story of how I ended up wearing his pants into the hospital because I needed a pair of pants, and he was left without because we were just in our swimsuits and stuff like that. But I had quite a reaction, I guess more serious than I remember, according to Bob. So it's not necessarily a humorous story, but then Bob had to take the rest of the trip himself because they did not allow me to go back onto the trip for a couple days.
Let's see.
Canoe trips were the other, because remember you got to choose, right, between a truck trip and a canoe trip. And normally I thought the truck trips were the best because you covered some real ground.
Sure.
And you got away. It was an adventure. Canoe trips were an adventure, but canoe trips, boy, I found out real quick, were mosquitoes, poison ivy, sleeping on dirt. It was fun, but I remember one canoe trip, and in my canoe, I forgot who was in the front of my canoe with me, but Lynn Sebring was a really good-hearted kid, but Lynn Sebring was scared to death of water. He was scared to death of water, and God knows why he was on a canoe trip. And so Lynn Sebring was in the middle of our canoe, I think. We had, for some reason, and all of our gear, and there was another canoe with us that had all of its gear, and we had all of our sleeping bags and food. And we got into this situation, and I don't remember whether we were on the Sabo or the Rifle River, where we were going around some bend, and there was a lot of current, and hit a log. I mean, there was a tree branch going over, and we got sucked off to the side where the canoe hit this thing, and the canoe went underneath the tree that was coming out, and the current forced and we all were scrunching down the seats trying to get under this thing, and it ended up forcing the gunnel of the canoe underwater. The canoe filled with water and went down with all of our gear and tipped over and spiraled down the river with all of our gear in it. And now the 3 of us are hanging on this log, being sapped by this swift current, pulling us, and we're holding on to this thing. And Lynn Sebring was just, boy, he thought he was going to die. Get me out. I thought, God, he was just scared to death. we were all I was scared to death he was going to die. You know, we weren't thinking we were going to die exactly, but we thought we were in a pretty bad situation. And somebody else managed to get a canoe close enough in that they could take Lynn off. And they got him off, and then we managed to shimmy to the shore. Now, we're in this wilderness shore now. We're just in our bathing suits. We're all scarred up from being on this tree, and we just were exhausted. It seemed like we were in this situation for like an hour before we managed to get to, and we just laid down. And we didn't realize till after we'd laid down on poison ivy. And I ended up having to go into Hale and get treated for it's poison ivy, you know, rubbed into my body when I was, you know, wet and sweating, and I just had horrible poison ivy after that. So I didn't think a lot of canoe trips.
That was the last one.
Truck trips were great.
Hot dogs on the river, that was with Doug. Doug was, it's his first year as director. And I had requisitioned all of the food for a river trip for the Ottawas. And these are kids that are, you know, 16 years old. And of course they have a huge appetite. And I had requisitioned, I think, 4 hot dogs per kid. And Tudor and I get there the first night, break camp, have the kids organized doing things. And we get into our food stash, and Doug had decided on his own, without telling us, that 1 hot dog would be enough per kid. These are big, you know, big kids. And we're going to be on the river for 4 days with, you know, like 1 bag of Oreos, you know, a dozen hot dogs, a bag of chips.